This podcast is brought to you by Contessa Digital.
You know, if I had one resolution for most of the women that I know, it would be that they could be a little bit more selfish. You know, we talk so much about how it's important to give and, as women, our feminine energy makes us nurturers, and it's true. It really is. But at the same time, we also talk about the fact that you can't give out to other people or pour out to other people from an empty cup. And for some reason, as much as we talk about it, we don't take that message to heart. And this is one of the reasons why, if you've been following me for a while, you will notice that I don't, even as a data coach, talk a lot about how to get a man, because I don't believe in centering men. In a society where in the US, the divorce rate is about 50%, it's not just getting a man is nice. It's a great thing. I'm married. I love my husband. But what's important is that you have a man who actually knows how to love you, who is interested in being a great partner to you, who is committed to working on that relationship. And the best way you can guarantee that is to make sure that you take care of yourself first and then allow your love to flow out of that. So, with that in mind, I am so happy to have a guest today. Michelle White is a mindset and identity coach. And Michelle, tell us a little bit more about what you do.
Hi. So first of all, thanks for having me on today. I am a mindset and identity coach. And one of my main things and what I came here to talk about today is self-prioritizing and putting yourself first, because then the identity work I'm doing is allowing you to become your true self. Because if you've only been exhibiting this identity that the world has created for you, then you're not living your life in the way that you fully are. But when you start to prioritize yourself, you're allowing yourself the opportunity to get to know who you are and what you want. And that's a continuous journey that you're going through in life. But most people will stop as soon as the identity that other people have given them is achieved. Then they will stop there, but then they'll wonder, why am I feeling burnt out? Why am I emotionally drained? And it's because they're defining their success by what the other people are telling them they need to be. So back to the self-prioritizing, once you're gaining that self-awareness and allowing yourself that space to become who you ultimately are, your authentic self, when you're existing in that space, the other things will start to flow to you as well.
It's funny because when you mention identity, the word just triggers a few different things for me. So you and I are both from the South of the US.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you were born in North Carolina. I was born in South Carolina. So, we're Carolina girls. We're both Black women. And for me, my dad is a minister. So growing up as a preacher's kid and, all of the things that are expected of you, or even the stereotypes. Like I always joke with friends about how people think that preachers' daughters are either saints or sluts. And, frankly, I've never been either. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so like having those expectations, talk to me a little bit about that, about just that process of trying to understand sometimes, like, no, this is not me. This is what I was told a Black woman behaves like.
When we're born and we're growing up, right, we're kind of taught the way to exist in our society. We're taught, okay, this is the way you sit when you go to these places. This is the way you act. You need to be able to exist in society. But the part is we also internalize the identity that society is giving us. So for example, when you're the preacher's daughter, yeah, you're going to have all these identities pushed upon you and other people also choosing that identity for you. So you've internalized it. Other people have validated that, yeah, that's what it should be. And then you start to act like that. But if that's not who you truly are, you're not going to ever match. If it doesn't match your values, then you're not going to be able to feel the full joy out of everything. It happens a lot. Also, I had a friend one time where I asked him, because he's very involved in his business, we're told, okay, success looks like going to become a businessman or going to become a woman. We have a billion different things we need to do before we can be considered successful. We need to be the CEO, we need to be the vice president, the secretary, we need to have 5 kids and like 2 cars, like the
Find a cure
marriage
for
and
cancer
everything.
during our lunch break. Yeah.
Exactly. And like do it with a smile on your face and don't talk back. And those are all identities that the world's pushing upon us. And say, for example, with my friend that's this businessman, he's saying different things and he's just trying to expand into finding more enjoyment in his life. I'm like, well, who would you be if you weren't Jay the businessman? Who would you be if you weren't the preacher's daughter? Who would I be if I wasn't the volleyball player or the Black girl or the girl from North Carolina? And it's not saying that all the identities are bad either, but we just don't have to internalize them. And we're multidimensional. I can be Michelle, the volleyball player, and also Michelle that doesn't want to play anymore. I don't have to continue it. Athletes get this a lot because so much of their identity is tied, especially if you look at like college athletes, they are so identified that people will be like, they fell off if they just don't continue that identity that the world gave to them. They could go become a successful person and the world would be like, guess you didn't do anything because
But even like Serena Williams,
yeah,
people
exactly.
People are like, what is she going to do now that she's retired? And it's like, you do know that she owns like a startup firm and like she invested all these businesses. Like Serena's going to be okay.
She's going to be okay. First of all, what are you doing today? What were you doing when she was practicing? Like, she's going to be fine. But it's like, that's us also projecting our own insecurities, right? But that's the identity of her. What is she going to do if she loses it? In the same way that most of us will be like, but this is who I am. Who would I be if I wasn't? And so what I encourage people to do is to question it, because questioning it doesn't mean you hate it. It's learning self-awareness so you can question. To be honest, even with religion, I'm not against religion for religion. This is just a statement. But for me, my closest relationship with a higher being came from me asking myself, why do I believe this? Is it only because everyone's telling me? Is it because I'm feeling it? You can go through these things multiple times in life and question it, because when you do that, you're actually building confidence into who you are. You're becoming more of yourself. Like, I know why I believe this. And then one day it gets questioned again. I'm like, and okay, I still believe this, or I don't believe this time, or this actually isn't that valuable in my life. This is where my value lies. And one tip I would say for people is to look at your values and look at how do you find your values? Look at the way you approach the world and significant events and how those events shaped you, whether it's good or bad, because those things are most likely where you're going to find your most value. So for me, one of my biggest values is honesty. I care a lot about honesty. I'm one of these people who's very unfiltered and had to work on being more filtered, but it was because I could never see a reason to not be honest. And like, if I'm dishonest, it like wrecks me. Like, it can be a simple thing and it just like wrecks me. So I could also realize that when I was around people who are not honest with themselves, it would bother me. And then when my job wasn't aligning with who I am, it would bother me. If my coach didn't align with who I am, it bothered me, because your world is judged off of your values. If you take value in peace, you're going to hate everything that doesn't give you peace. If you take your values in integrity, I have a high integrity value, then things that are out of integrity, things that don't resonate with the integral part of what they are, I won't like it. It will bother me even if I can't express it in words.
As when you mention your friend being a businessman, what immediately came to mind for me was my husband. So my husband is Mexican. So even with that, there's now that we're talking about having kids, there's talk of identity and being like, they'll have a Latino father or black mother, or like, how are we going to have those conversations about how they identify? But also, I remember some of the first occasions where he met my friends, he was a little pissed off about the fact that a lot of my friends, um, the first question they would ask is, "What do you do for a living?" And he was like, "There's just so much more to me than like my job." And I
Mhm.
think about that because before he said it, I'm just like, you grow up in you not grow up, but you become an adult, you get a job in corporate America. People ask that question all the time. You don't question that. But it's like, it is true. Like, there is more to me, and especially for me. I'm someone who's multi-passionate and has more than one career. um, like, there is more to me than what it is that I do for a living. And I think that's a major part with identity and why so many people are dealing with like burnout and quiet quitting and stuff like that is people get into their careers and then they stop asking questions about who they are.
Mhm. It's exactly like that, and one thing I have noticed, so I'm living in Germany right now. I'm American, but I'm living in Germany right now. And although maybe within the German community, that's a very common question in my personal community, we don't really ever talk about what we do for work. Like, unless someone got a promotion, we're like, oh, congratulations. Most of our talks are much deeper, or at least beyond talking about work. And actually, to be honest, I don't really like talking to people that much who only talk about work, because it's not who they are, like it's what they do. So
Right.
even if you're a coach, it's what you do, but like, who are you? If you're the businessman, that's cool, but like, even if you were to go, what if you had to say what your resume is without saying what the actual credentials were? What would you then say? Oh, well, I'm a passionate thinker, I'm a blah blah blah. These words at least are more descriptive of who you actually are, versus just saying, I'm a businessman, I'm a CEO, I am this, I'm that. So recently, I actually was meeting up with an American, and this was very funny to me because I noticed it after the last time I visited home. This is a very American question to ask, like, what do you do? And not only what do you do, but then just start spitting off like a resume, all
Yeah.
your credentials. Like, I live next to so and so went to is in my neighborhood, and oh, I did this and I won this and blah blah. And I'm like, okay, so how do you feel about your move? How's your life? Like, I want to know more about the person. And maybe this is me, maybe that's because of the way I see the world. But I feel like once you do become more self-aware and you are aware more of identity and your own identity, the way you want to know about other people also changes. So when you find yourself only talking about credentials and things, then it's kind of like reflective most of the time of what you would find important, right? So if you change your values in the way you're asking questions, it's also going to change the way things are around you. Of course, sometimes it's a natural question to ask, but it also reflects like, okay, well, why is he upset about this? And he could also find new ways to answer this too, because I think that would be quite interesting if you just said, someone says, what do you do? Well, it can be like, well, I play volleyball on the weekends and I have a great wife and I do this thing and I do that thing. So I think that would be, it's an interesting perspective and it's an interesting thing. And I think in order to change that, more people just have to start asking other questions.
Like after he brought that up to me and I started thinking about it, I think one of the things that I found problematic about the question is that when people answer it, first of all, a lot of people hate their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So people talk about the mechanics of their job. And then when they ask me, that's also the same thing they're expecting. So, like, I would say I do talk about my careers a lot. I'm a dating coach, I freelance as a journalist. You and I both have hypnotherapy in common.
Mm-hmm.
I also do some social media management. I do all the things. And, but like, when I talk about those things, I want to talk about like why all of a sudden it feels like Instagram like just sucks when it used to be the
Yeah.
most amazing thing ever. Or I want to talk about like how our romantic relationships and how like our relationships at work interact. Like I want to talk about the topic. I don't want to
Mhm.
talk about how I built a funnel for my business. I don't want to talk about what's the question that your clients ask you the most. Like, you know,
Mhm.
I don't
Yeah.
want to talk about the day to day.
Yeah. And unless it is like their ultimate passion, which most of the time it's not, like you said, then there's no reason to talk about that. And I find it more interesting. Like you said, if you're a social media manager, be like, oh, well, how does that work? Like, what do you like about that? Why do you choose to do that in your free time? Because if that's not your main job, there's a reason you're doing it, unless it's
Right.
just for money, of course, which is the thing. But I think we have to, I think as you become more aware, then they also will become more aware. But I've also found there are a lot of people who aren't used to those types of questions yet. And they're also like very resistant to them because they don't know how to handle it in that after work, we're all here to numb ourselves and numb our painness. Like let's let's have a drink and not talk about anything deep because we got to go do all the same crap again tomorrow. And that's where like you really need to realign your whole life to be with your values, with your actual identity. So you don't feel like you need to turn off at the end of the day like that.
Yeah. Or let's have a drink and complain about all the bad things that happened at work today.
Exactly.
Like,
There's good things in life. Like we don't have to be complainers. There's so many good things in life. And if you start looking for them, not saying that there's not bad things, because there's terrible things, but if the only thing you're doing is always talking about negative things, then it's up to you to choose that something positive will happen in your life. You're choosing negativity every day.
yeah, no, my mom used to hammer that Bible verse into my head, as a man thinketh, so is he.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
That's
like
a
I would
word.
complain about things. Yeah,
Yeah.
I would complain about things. She'd be like, "Well, yeah, if you're focused on it all the time, then of course." Like,
Yeah. When people don't do the inner work too, like they're just sitting there like simmering is like in a bathtub of crap. Like they just don't want to let the water out. They're too scared to let the water out. So they'd rather sit there in their crap than think about possibly emptying the tub and doing something new.
oh yeah, I always tell people like people choose things because better the devil they do know than the devil they
Mm-hmm.
don't know. But it's like, but they're both devils. Like, you
Yeah.
know.
People also choose to make excuses all the time. So there you go. What's another thing people do? Make excuses on the regular.
You mentioned the fact that you live in Germany now.
Mhm.
And, you know, for me, that would be like I love to travel. I I particularly love Europe, and I feel like sometimes that's such a stereotype to be like, you know, the girl who grew up in the South in the suburbs who like really loves Paris. But like
Everybody loves Paris.
yes.
Even you go to Paris, they're like, the Americans love us, the Americans and the Chinese. And I'm like, yep, I bet.
But see, even I'll admit that Paris is dirty. Beautiful, but dirty.
Yeah, it's
But
dirty, but it's the vibe. It's
yeah.
the vibe.
But yeah, you know, I've been to Europe several times, you know, Canada, Cuba, you know, different places like that. And I love that adventure, that being able to go out and explore cultures and everything. But I know it's completely different to live abroad. So how did you make that decision?
So I had studied abroad in college, and most of my studies abroad were in Latin America. So I was in like Brazil and Costa Rica and a few other places. And so my passion was in like international business. So when I graduated college, I went up to North Carolina again to work for a wine company that I was hoping one day would get me to working abroad or doing some kind of international business thing, because I was in the same boat of, oh, I love traveling. I love going all these places. And then I basically hated it. It was terrible. It was terrible. It like sucked away at my soul. And I was like, you know what? I can stay here and do the thing that everyone's telling me to do. Cause it was very much you've got the job, you're doing the things. And it was just like, yeah. And y'all told me to do all these things and it's terrible. So
You
I'm
black
going to
girl magic. You did
my
it.
black girl magic decided that black girl's gonna move. Because I'm like, I don't like this identity y'all chose for me. And so basically I was like, you know what? I know everyone's telling me to stay. And I even had gotten a promotion, but I was like, nah, I think I'm just going to dip. And so I had lived abroad like as a student, but it was different when you're not a student anymore. And I first moved to China, and I chose China because I had a friend who was in Korea, and she had told me, oh, teaching English in China is such a good idea. You should do it. And I didn't want to go back to Latin America because I felt it was like the safe option. And I was like, if I'm
Right.
going to do this, I should go do everything, like do something farther out of my comfort zone, because I know I can always go back to Latin America and be happy. So I went to China, and that was a tough year, but learned a lot. It's a very different world, but okay. And then I'll just tell you where I went so you can get the concept. So I was in East Asia. So I was in China. I went to Brazil for a bit, and then Korea. And then from Korea, I moved to Germany because I had an ex who was in Germany. The big thing about living abroad is like, there is no going, of course there is going back, but you're not intending to go back.
Right.
And this is a different perspective. Also, you're dealing with a lot more day-to-day nuances that you don't notice when you're in the short term, or you really just don't care about. Like, there's probably things that if I pointed it out to you, you'd be like, yeah, whatever. Why are you even talking about that? But when you see that day to day, then it can build up. So like, there's certain things that become a lot more difficult. One of the biggest advantages though in being an expat is that you are able to learn a lot more about yourself, because you're put into full out of your comfort zone most of the time, right? And it's different levels depending on the country. You also have to go through you can't compare what life in one country is like than to the other, because sometimes it's way easier and sometimes it's more difficult. Living in Europe is a lot easier in theory than living in China, because the cultures are a bit more close for American in Western culture than it is to go to East Asia. But one of the tough things is that time is going on everywhere else too. So you're missing out on a lot of things at home. But you're creating an entire life of your own abroad as well. My identity as a Black person has like never been more clear to me than living abroad. And it's not just like, oh, I know I'm a Black girl because everyone else is white. It's more of the now I can see so many parts of my culture that I didn't even think of as being Black, as being, oh, this is a very Black Southern thing. I'll even say it to one of my friends, like, oh, this is a Black Southern thing. It's a Black Southern thing. Just like all the time. Oh, this is what we would cook. This is how we would say this. And those kinds of things you miss. But yeah, living your day-to-day life just becomes so different, because in some ways you're in a bubble at times, and in other ways you're exposed to everything all at the same time.
When my husband proposed, that year that we were engaged, I did a whole bunch of solo trips. So I went to New Orleans, I went to Havana, I went to Montreal, I went to Lisbon, like just all these different places. And, I came back and I was like, okay, let's get married, let's do this. But
Yeah. Love it. Love it. Love it.
but in the process of that, there were definitely some things that I noticed when you talk about identity, and particularly identity as a Black woman. Um, I had some experiences in, most notably, Lisbon, Portugal, and in Havana, with colorism.
Yeah.
In the United States, we talk about it. We talk about like Black people being light skinned and dark skinned, and like I myself am pretty medium, and I have a light skinned mother and a dark skinned father. So, like we talk about those things, and we make comments about like house slaves and field slaves and stuff like that. But it was so subtle when I was in other places. And then it would be like, did I just experience this? Or did I just
Mhm.
see a darker skinned Black woman get treated differently than me? Or am I imagining this?
Yeah. Sometimes, and that's the thing, that it's all of it at the same time, because you also get American Black person privileges. So
Yeah.
being a Black person, a westernized Black person is different. Being an American Black person is different. So even if there's an African Black woman next to me, maybe she's most likely going to be treated very differently than I am from both Black people and from white people. And that's quite an interesting thing because you have, in a way, I guess, an American privilege that you don't really think about when you're abroad as well.
Yeah, and then that was another thing too. I remember visiting Europe, and I'm just gonna be frank and say it. I remember
Mhm.
visiting during the Trump administration,
Yeah, that's a
and
whole. Whew. Let me tell you about being a representative. Good God. Everybody needs to tell you their opinion, but continue.
right. But also, I remember it happened particularly in France, um, being asked if I was Caribbean, if I was Haitian, if I was
Mhm.
Jamaican, all that. And I kept thinking, like, one, why is it that all these people don't think I'm American? And two, is that a compliment or an insult? Like,
No, I can tell you that's not it. Only because I've been around enough French people now. They're guessing it most likely due to your color.
yeah,
Maybe if you were talking, they might think you're Caribbean. But then again, I've also met people here that are like Haitian Americans, but they live in France. So I'm chatting with them and I'm like, oh, wow, your accent's really good. And they're like, I'm American. And I'm like, oh, how was I supposed to know? We're in the middle of France. You're
right.
a Black person in France. I assume you were French. But there's a lot of the women from the islands look very similar to our complexion. So that's not that absurd. Um, and there are a lot of people from the French islands living in France. So, but if you were talking, that would be a bit odd.
When I started really getting into travel, and particularly solo travel, which honestly wasn't a choice for me. It was more of a fact that I wanted to go, and my friends could never get their lives together and like plan
Mhm.
anything, you know? So it's like, fine, I'll do it
I'm
myself.
doing it. Yep.
But, I remember my parents having concerns, particularly with solo travel and all that. And then later, my husband, he still does. A few months ago, I went to London by myself, and you know, I he tries very hard to like let me be myself and be free and all that. But I could tell like he would try to ask questions about like,
Mhm.
so what are you doing now? Like, where are you planning on going? Like, you sure you're okay? You double check the
It's
lock on your
cute.
yeah. But you know, my parents had concerns about my safety, but they also not just the general, if I were a white girl traveling safety. Um,
Mhm.
the whole identity thing, especially in the past couple of years with like Meghan Markle and,
Mhm.
seeing how Britain has treated her. Like, did your family have those kind of concerns when you made the decision you were like, "Hey, I'm moving abroad?"
Yeah, so everywhere has been a bit different. When I was in Brazil, I think more people reacted like, "Oh my God, so unsafe." I think
Yeah.
Brazil and Mexico and China are the ones that people have like the craziest reactions to, like, ah, it's so unsafe. But to be honest, East Asia is definitely one of the safest places like I've ever lived. Like I would say it's definitely safer than even here. Munich is just an extremely safe place as well. Things happen everywhere, but Munich very rarely, and the same with East Asia. What I find funny, so my family, I think they worry, but I think my family also has very accepted that I also am going to do what I'm going to do. So they should, this is how I see it from my side. I don't know how they would actually phrase this, but I think they would trust me and they know that I'm going to do what I'm going to do. So it's better to support me in some kind of way than to try to force me to do something that I'm not going to want to. Because I would think that was exemplified when I gave up my scholarship in college to change colleges. And that was the first time that I was like, yeah, I'm doing what I want. Like I'm choosing myself. This is the self-prioritizing. And then the same with the quitting my job when I was miserable. I was like, it's my life. I'm taking responsibility for what I'm doing. I'm going to go move and I'll be back in a few years. It's been a few years. I'm still here. But the safety, I think that they care about it, but to be honest, I think Now I'm in a very safe place. And in Asia, I think it was fine. I think they more have so cared maybe a bit about Brazil. And it's also the way people put things into your head. But I don't think they worry about me on a day-to-day basis. To be honest, though, one of the biggest reasons I find it hard to move back to the US, if I were to ever consider it, is the safety.
Right.
It's kind of funny. Like my mom, she'll be talking to me about shootings. I'm like, yeah, you know what's crazy is like the last time I went home, maybe like at the end of, let's say, a year ago. So like, or this year, sorry, March 2022. And when I went on a walk in the neighborhood next to my like suburban neighborhood,
Right.
my heart was like about to jump out of my chest because it was probably like sunset time, and I was like, oh, the weather's so nice, it'd be nice to just like listen to my audiobook and like walk around the neighborhood. My heart was about to jump out of my chest because I was like, oh my God, what if someone comes up and shoots me? What if every car that came by, I was scared like they were going to shoot me, like, and no one was going to find me like for a few hours because there's no reason to come looking for me. And it was then that I noticed that when I was much younger and I was living in the US, you become numb to it. So it's
Right.
funny that people are asking me about my safety abroad, where I'm like, to be honest, the most unsafe place I've ever lived has been the US. And the most unsafe place I continue to visit is the US by far, not even kind of close. When I was growing up, I remember this is like that making excuses, I would say, especially like even people abroad be like, oh my God, gun violence. I'm like, that only happens in some areas. That's like a thing that doesn't happen in like the nice areas, or that only happens sometimes. And then I really thought about it one time. I was like, okay, well, my school had a guy who brought a gun to school one time. And like
Yeah.
those gun shootings like are always like just in the other city or just around the corner or just happened at somewhere I was at. And then now your mom's like, hey, yeah, there was a shooting at the mall the other day. Where are you at? The mall? Like things that blow my mind, but when you're living there, you're so numb to it that you're not thinking about it. You might think about it, but it's not in the same way that me, I've been 7 years gone now. When I visit, I'm already anxious for my next visit. Like
Right.
I think if I moved back, I would lose my mind, mostly because there's nothing that's off limits anymore. And it's just like a funny thing when people talk about safety abroad, when I'm like, I don't think anybody's about to shoot me in Munich. I don't think anybody's shooting me in Paris or London. I don't even think they're shooting me in South Africa. They'll come with other things, but they're not shooting.
No, I mean, I will say like the safest places that I felt were actually, I just mentioned them, Lisbon and Havana were the
Mhm.
safest places that I
Yeah.
felt.
Cuba's like
And
really safe.
yes. And my husband was so panicked the entire time I was in Cuba, and I was like, I love it here. Like I'm sleeping better here.
Yeah.
I
Nobody's
sleep
going to come in my room and shoot me.
I sleep better here than I do in Atlanta. Like
Yeah. It's so true.
but no, like when you're talking about, self-prioritization, like I brought that up and asked you that question about how your family feels because this is the biggest challenge I have with my clients. I always tell my clients all relationships are related. You show me a woman who has issues with her romantic relationships, she has issues with her job, with,
Mhm.
her family, with friends. And the biggest thing that is always like, kind of pulling teeth is boundaries because back to that idea of identity and what a good girl does, it's always like, well, if I set this boundary, so and so is going to be mad at me or my world's going to fall apart because people are going to think that I'm terrible or that I'm an awful person now and it's
Mhm.
like once you get in this habit of learning to prioritize yourself, one, you learn it's the least selfish thing you can do because when I make myself a priority, I am a much better daughter. I'm a much better
Mhm.
sister. I'm a much better aunt. I'm a much better wife because I don't resent people, right?
Yep.
And also, you learn that people really and truly live. Like, you set those boundaries, and sometimes people give you like a what or, but after they adjust, they survive. They're fine.
Yep. Yep. And it shows you, I say that boundaries are the way you're just telling people how to respect you. And I had just done a post on this as well, where it's like, you have to look at especially maybe this would relate to the dating as well, but when you're setting boundaries and people build walls all the time, but they find it hard to set boundaries. Well, the walls are
Right.
keeping everyone out. The boundaries are letting people in. The boundaries are allowing you to be vulnerable. The boundaries are, people like people with boundaries. Like, it's crazy. It's so much easier to deal with a person with boundaries when you're clear. You say, hey, I like this. Hey, I don't like this. This works for me. This doesn't. Now I don't have to decode. Now I don't have to do all these extra things when it comes to understanding how to deal with the other person. And it makes my life better. And like you said, it makes the way I can show up for everyone else worth it for them, because it won't be worth it if I'm resenting them, if I'm feeling overwhelmed in every kind of way. It doesn't work. It doesn't mean anything for me to show up super tired and not allowing myself to be my best self around you. Of course, there's support, there's reasons to do certain things, but people are so scared of setting boundaries because they're not going to be liked. But that person probably doesn't like you if
Right.
you are not setting boundaries. They're liking another version they're liking your representative, is what I would say.
Yeah.
You're sending the representative, but you're not sending you. So if you want them to like you, then tell them how to like you. Tell them how to deal with you.
Yeah. No, I always say boundaries are an invitation. So if I set a boundary with my husband, I'm telling him, look, I love you and I want to love you. I want us to have like this great relationship. Um, I personally can't be a good wife under these circumstances. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's all a boundary is.
Yeah. It's so simple,
Like,
but people want to make it complicated because they've come up with every other scenario in their head that could go wrong. And it's like, but what if it goes right?
right. Or they listen to, I don't want to slam dating coaches because I am one, but
Yeah. I understand what you mean.
right. But they listen to a certain group of dating
Mm-hmm.
coaches who are all about, you know, playing the game and like this is what you need to do to like make someone crazy about you. And it's like, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Um,
Yeah. And do work on yourself so you can start to attract healed people. So, because when you work on yourself, you wouldn't want to have games. Peace becomes more exciting when you allow peace to exist in your life. But if you're looking to still, if you're playing games, you're not really taking responsibility for yourself or the situation, right? You're
right.
kind of saying, the game didn't work, then that's why it's not working. It doesn't mean like, oh, something's wrong with me if it didn't work, but I'm responsible for my half and what I'm allowing and the respect. What if I play these games but don't get respected? What's the point?
Yeah, not to mention like you and I are both in our 30s.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, when it comes to I was gonna say when it comes to marriage, but even with like friendships, because I don't have time to constantly like drop friends and find new friends every year.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be with people for like the next few decades.
Yeah.
And that's just a long time. If you're masking yourself and trying to be one way to get people to like you, like I just can't, with modern healthcare, there's no reason to believe I won't live to be 100. I
Mm-hmm.
can't see spending the next 60, 70 years trying to keep up
Yeah.
a certain appearance.
Yeah. And when you're living in that other identity, it's kind of like, it's not only is, okay, you're in this identity and you're trying to impress the other people, you're not setting boundaries. Your cup is like empty and tipped over.
Right.
Like you're it's not even your cup. It's like hand painted with some other stuff on it. And so you can't even give from who you are. So you were like fully exhausted, burnt out, everything. But if you realign, well, one, when you're realigning, you're also going to learn about yourself. When you learn about yourself, you would start to value yourself in a new way that you'll be like, I'm going to set these boundaries because these other things haven't worked. I'm going to set these boundaries because I want respect in my relationships, all my relationships. And I'm going to set these because then they're going to set theirs. And it's like we're working on the relationship, even if it's a friendship. It's being very clear. It's so much easier to deal with friends that tell me, I like this, I don't like this, or Michelle, it was kind of messed up when you did this thing. Of course, there's communication, like you have to know how to talk to people and how to express yourself clearly and not screaming and different things. But man, it's been so much, my friendships have gotten so much better when I started setting better boundaries. And it gives my friends the opportunity to set boundaries as well.
Yeah, and also like learning to give that space because it has definitely happened to me before where a friend has come to me and said, "Hey, Keisha, you said this, you did that. I didn't really like it. I didn't think like I didn't think that was appropriate." And we all have our things. So there have
Mhm.
been times where someone has said that to me and I've been triggered and I've
Yeah.
been like, "Okay, so you saying that kind of hurt my feelings. And can you give me a day or two? Let me
Mhm.
come back to this." But being able to have that space for each other too and not to automatically go off like, "Well, I don't like when you said this and I can't
Yeah.
stand that you did that and you need to check yourself. Why are you worried about me and what I'm doing?"
Yeah, exactly. You have to have mutual respect for each other. You don't have to agree on everything. Boundaries don't mean you agree on everything.
Right.
Like, you're never going to agree with everyone on everything, but open, like you said, having that space to allow that person to come. Well, then now you can go back to them and you work on it, you practice it, you get better at it because you're going to become less triggered later on. And sometimes someone setting their boundary might mean that, yeah, that relationship like doesn't work because we don't match in these ways. And that's okay because you can make new friends or you want to deal with people who want to deal with you. And they
Right.
should also want to deal with people who want to deal with them. And it's okay if sometimes those things don't work.
Always I hate to be like at a certain age these things happen, but I do think that like around 30 is that point where you start realizing that you have some friendships that you're friends with this person because you've been friends with this person, right?
Hmm.
And you're
You've
starting
been
to be
friends with
like,
them because they've existed around you this whole time, or they're from
right,
your hometown or something, but not necessarily because you are actually good for each other either. Doesn't mean you're bad for each other,
right.
but relationships don't have to be like for romantic relationships don't have to always be forever either. Sometimes people are a period and you can appreciate it and not ruin it by trying to hold on to something you shouldn't be hold on to.
Yeah. Or sometimes there's a level of access. Like I
Hmm.
can think of a particular friend of mine that she and I had been friends since we were like 14, 15. And we used to be incredibly close. And it kind of got to the point where, like, she and I both realized that we could not be like the confidants in each other and all that. Like, we don't live far apart from each other. It's not like she lives across the country.
Hmm.
But now we might see each other every few months and like talk and grab coffee and keep it light. But like that closeness that we used to have because the things that we each need is so different. Like it just
Hmm.
doesn't work to be that close anymore.
Yeah. And I think that takes maturity and self-awareness to get to that stage and not see it as like a negative. If anything, it's almost positive because both of you can see like this wasn't a wasted friendship. It's just we are not, how do I say, we're not in the same places anymore, and our interests and our lives have changed in a way that are different. We didn't grow together, but it's
Right.
okay. We can grow in different paths in the same forest.
Yeah. So I want to ask you because, you are out here still in these dating streets.
Yeah. Woo! It's an interesting one.
Well, I wanted to ask you about self-prioritization as it impacts dating because I know for me, my whole journey into becoming a dating coach started with having a quarter life crisis that was sparked by like a friend getting married and me just like having a breakdown and being like everyone in my life has all these things and like
Hmm.
I'm a hot mess.
Hmm.
So I think about like once I started that process and being really clear when I was dating men about this is what I need, this is what I like, this is what's important to me, this is what I value. Um, just the different reactions because I definitely was a people pleaser when I first started dating. And I would just, kind of go along to get along, whatever the man wants, all of that. And, I definitely had the experiences of me being like, okay, this is what matters to me, and men being like, well, that doesn't work. I need like I remember having an ex basically say he needed a trophy. He didn't use the word trophy, but
Mhm.
he was
Yeah.
like, my reputation and all of this is really important to me. It's really important to me that I portray a certain image, and I need you to fit this image. And if you can't fit that image, and it was like, well, I can't fit that image, you know.
Yeah. Wow. Then don't date me.
Right. But like I also remember like dating some men who, when I was prioritizing myself and saying, "Hey, this is what I need," like people will talk about, there are so many like social media accounts dedicated nowadays to like men being trash.
Mhm.
Um, in particular, I've seen some with like, black men being trash and all that. And there's trash in all races, as someone who has
Yes,
dated all
for sure.
races. Yeah.
Does not discriminate.
Right. But also, like, one of the things I noticed was I met men dating, and even now, like, in the context of just going out and meeting different people, men who their so-called trashy behavior is kind of a response to, like, they never had their needs met, and they never thought that they were allowed to express their needs. Like,
Mhm,
sometimes that macho type of, like, bulldozing other people and their opinions and stuff comes from a place of, otherwise they don't feel heard.
mhm. When you say that, it makes me think of even just being around guys, not always necessarily romantic, but some I know I've had friends like who have been like, "How do you talk to them like that?" And I'm like, "Just talk to them." But the difference is like in the way you're saying, maybe sometimes they're not even offered that space. Well, I think often with the girls, most of the time, at least in the communities I'm noticing that I'm in, I don't think they're really giving them that space like you're saying. And I don't know that they're necessarily trying to, because you have to realize that a lot of the girls that are dealing with them are also just looking for validation. So they're like, my value isn't my validation. But if you start asking them more questions beyond what do you do, they actually like and sit there and actually listen, and not like I'm listening so that they like me. No, just be genuinely interested in the people that you talk to. Be like more aware of your own energy. But they enjoy it that you're like wanting to ask them more questions. Because if they're not, those people will exit like
Yeah,
immediately.
definitely.
People who don't want anything to do with deeper talks or connecting, they will find their ways out. But a lot of people, if you're just like, yeah, tell me more about that. Or I know in this dance community I'm in, I was talking with a DJ. Oh, how'd you get into that? But I don't have to talk to him about DJing the whole time. Talk to him about DJing for about 2 seconds. And then they tell me they're from somewhere interesting. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. Let's talk about other things, because you're a human beyond just this thing that you do or this image that you're portraying. And if you're not a human beyond that and you haven't identified that yet, then I'm not sure I want to deal with you, because I know I'm a human beyond just a pretty face, just a voice. I am also ABCD, and I want to know about your EFG, like
Right.
continuing life together. And I think you have to realize that you're more so that you can expect that they're also more, right? And it'll change the way you interact with just people in general. If you're like, okay, I want to have more deep conversations, I want to have more of these things with men or friends or the people I'm interacting with, open the space for it by being what you're looking for.
Yeah, you brought up a really great point about validation. Like, I think this is oftentimes why men and women don't hear each other, because they're both operating from the place of their wounds.
Mm-hmm.
And, however that plays out, maybe you're wounded, so you become a people pleaser because you don't want to be hurt again. So everyone
Mm-hmm.
must like me now. Or maybe, your wound is, I don't want anyone to see me be vulnerable like that again. So I'm going to always act tough. And then these relationships keep affecting us. So we date one person and that situation plays out, and then we leave that even harder than we came in. And then
Mm-hmm.
we go into the next relationship, and because I'm coming in with all these walls up and you're coming in with all these walls up, you know, our walls butt again and it ends, it explodes. And there's a new set of walls that go into the next relationship. And this is why I wanted to have you on as an example of so many of the women that I work with come to me doing all these things that they think they're supposed to do. And it's not until you don't necessarily have to move abroad. You don't
Yeah.
necessarily have to like change your entire career. But until you start making some decisions where you make yourself the priority, you can't even really see other people for who they are. Like
Mm-hmm.
until you see yourself and when you start to see your own like wounds and the ways in which you build up walls, then you start to see other people. It's like, okay, I can see this person has a wall up.
Yeah.
Now, I may not be able to have a relationship with them because they may refuse to ever take it down, and that's not my
Mm-hmm.
problem.
Can't control other people.
Right, right. But if this is someone who also can recognize a wall and they're willing to work on it and I'm willing to work on mine, then like we can do this.
Mm-hmm. I think that a lot of that, especially when it's coming to the identity, is also you have to be ready to get to know yourself. Because I've even had it where in the past, so you have your breakup, something was probably created when you had a breakup, even if you don't think something was probably created. But all of the guys you're going after or the people you're wanting to date you're going after are reflections of you, so you're only going to notice what you're able to recognize in yourself, right? So if you, what is this said, if I am love right now and I am projecting love, I can recognize love in someone else. I can recognize these things. But if I'm hurt and I'm sad and I am closed and all these things, I can only see that, but doesn't mean I'm going to see it and call it that. But that's what I'm only going to be able to see. It's only the thing that I'm going to be attracted to. And when it shows up, it's something familiar to me because it is me. So when you start to change your ways and shape yourself into your authentic self and your identity, then you're able to see them. And it's with this wall thing, because if I meet someone who isn't delivering in the way that I'm expecting, then I have to be like, okay, that's not what I'm looking for in this moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely
Mm.
does. And it makes you take things less personally as
Mm-hmm.
well. Because
You stop internalizing all of it.
right. You know, back to being a preacher's kid, you know, I started dating at a fairly young age because I felt like the church always came first, you know, and I
Mm-hmm.
wanted attention. So, you know, I was going to go out and find attention.
Yeah.
And I very early on became like a serial monogamous. I could not be single. The second like something ended with one boyfriend, I had to immediately go out and find a new boyfriend.
Mm-hmm.
Like it drove me insane to be single for like a week, you know?
Yeah.
And you know, when I started like my own healing process and journey and all that, it was like, why am I so uncomfortable with being by myself? Like, what
Mm-hmm.
is that? You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And doing the work on yourself is not easy for anyone. It gets better over time because you know that it makes you better over time. But if
Right.
I go do work on myself, I still have to admit to things that I'm not excited to admit to myself about. But I'm excited to know that if I can recognize the problem, then I can work on the problem. I'm excited to know that, oh, I can, if I see that I've been dating emotionally unavailable people, or I see that I've been dropping all of my boundaries after a certain point in the relationship, then maybe that's it. And especially in dating, especially when you're really wanting to be liked, I mean, your boundaries get dropped really quickly. But you have to remember, like, it's that simple mentality of, do I like them kind of thing
Yeah.
going into the date. Like, do I like them? Do I like them? Because you need to worry about you. How does Michelle feel about this situation? How do I feel about this situation? And when you start doing that, then it also allows them to come to you more, especially as like a woman. It allows them to try to, yeah, come to you and allow you to be in your feminine. And I think that took a long time to realize as well, especially when there's the scarcity, there's a ton of different things. What I don't know what the percentages are, but it's like some ridiculously high amount of women going for like 5% of men or something like this.
Yeah.
Like the competition, which I hate the word competition when it comes, because in my mind there is no competition. You are going out there and somebody's going to match you eventually, but it's not a competition. This will also help you relieve your stress. Stop seeing it all as a competition, because you can't win this kind of competition. Like,
I started to realize that one of the reasons why I was in so many relationships was because I didn't like myself,
mm,
and I was
mm-hmm.
trying to I was trying to be liked by somebody else's love of me. You know what I mean? Like if they
Yep.
loved me enough, I'd see it from their point of view and be like, oh, now I understand why like I'm awesome.
Yeah.
And,
They
of
can
course,
validate me.
right. Of course, and of course that's working backwards. But like, you know, even those things that were like the whole concept of a high value man or a high value woman and what
Mm-hmm.
makes them so valuable. Like I can think of in particular dating someone who I won't say who he is because he's fairly well known. But on paper he had all the things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like he had like a lot of money because of what he did and everything. And we started dating and I realized that he may have made a lot of money, but he was broke because of like his spending habits and all of that. And he had this great personality like around other people, but when he and I were together, just to be honest, he wasn't bad. He was boring. He was, but he
Oh,
was,
yeah.
yeah.
This is where the personality gets attached to the job. Go
Right,
develop
like
an identity and a
right, like I
personality.
guess like it's not like he treated me badly or anything like that. It was
Yep.
just like it wasn't stimulating, and like I started thinking about like to your point, that whole idea of like competition for the top 5%, like it's nice if that's a nice bragging point and it's great for social media if I can go on Instagram and post that like my husband makes this amount of money. But what I can say in real life is that my husband is really, really good at managing the money that he makes. So
Yeah. Way
I'd much
better.
rather like I'd much rather have that than someone who like, money flows out just as quickly as it comes in, even if it's a lot flowing in, there's like just as much flowing out.
Yeah.
And, I bring that up because, money's just an easy thing for people to understand. But that's also where the scarcity mindset comes from, is that you think you want certain things. And until you experience them, until like you learn and grow from that experience, like you start once you do that healing work, you start to realize that like the priorities should be adjusted. The priorities maybe weren't your priorities, they were somebody else's, and you need to find what
Mhm.
yours are.
Yeah. It's like everyone else told you, like, this is the type of guy you're trying to go for. This is the type of guy you're trying to go for. And when it's not working, you're like, oh, but I need it to work. Yeah. But in this case, they're boring. Well, I don't want to live the rest of my life with someone who's not interesting. And I think also when you're doing that inner work and you're becoming more of yourself, I mean, you're reflected so strongly what your knowledge level is, right? So now when I meet someone who's very, very insecure about things, it is almost like overwhelming to deal with
Right.
their insecurities. Not saying insecure people are bad, but I can see where they're not doing their self-work. And I'm just like, oh my God, we just can't even, I can barely deal with this conversation because I'm like dying because of all the things you're trying to point out or brag about that I just don't care about, because I care a lot more about who you are as a person, but you're not there yet to care about who you are as a person. So if you're wanting an actual high value man, which I would assume is someone you want to actually talk to on a daily basis, it doesn't mean that he has to be poor. It doesn't mean that he can't have nice things, but you have to become someone that kind of person would want to be around. And then you have to be around each other, of course, but you're not doing it for them. You're doing it for you. And you will also want someone who is doing their self work for them. And then it matches. Because if they're only doing everything for me, I mean, they can do things for me that's nice, but they're doing everything for me. well, then what are they wanting from me? Like where's the balance? Of course, it's never 50-50. It's like a seesaw, but how are you able to, you'll never be able to deliver if they're doing certain things to a certain extent.
I was thinking about another relationship I was in. I was dating this guy, again, great on paper.
The great on papers I learned early in life are not great in real life. You really need to want to go with like the medium on papers. Check the papers. Learn the, what do they call it? SEO? Like learn the keywords
Yeah.
for the resume. That's what you want to look at.
But yeah, so, you know, I I got exactly what I prayed for. I prayed to God to have the male version of me. And I got
Oof.
him.
Oof. Praise you.
Yeah. So, part of me is very practical, pragmatic. Like I'll be the first to tell everyone my husband is the romantic one in our relationship.
Mhm.
I have to work at romance, like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I dated this guy, and again, he was great on paper. We had been together for a few months, and I was just kind of like I was over at his place, and I was just kind of offhand, like, yeah, marriage. What do you think about that? And he's watching TV, and he looks up at me, and he's like, yeah, sure. And I'm like, huh? And he's like, you're asking me about marriage. Like, we get along great. You've met my family. They like you.
Whoa,
Like,
was he thinking you were proposing to?
no, no, no. So here's the thing. He was like, so you're wanting me to propose. So he was like, well, like, just let me know what type of ring do you want? Like, how would you like this proposal to be? All of that, and I'll work it out. And I was like, huh, okay. Like, 'cause I really wasn't like, I was expecting a discussion about like timelines and like
Mhm.
whether or not he saw us.
Yeah.
And I was like, you don't want to like sit down and like discuss this further? Like what's going on in your head now? And he goes, look, you're great, you know, you're impressive. My family likes you. Both of us work all the time. It's not like we're going to see each other that often anyways because of the way we
Oof.
both work. And he was like, I truly believe you'll be a good mother. So he was like, it's fine. Like, he was like, just let me know what your preferences are about like a ring and stuff like that. And it was in that moment that I was like, I can't do this. Like, and it's funny because before I totally would have been like, marriage is about generational wealth building, marriage is practical, like this, you should just find someone
So you believe you could actually fall in love, and then you're like, oh, that's a thing.
that's what hit me. That was the first time that it hit me that I might actually want to like be in love and not just
I wonder if when, do you know what your reasoning was for asking?
I I had a bunch of friends at the time who were getting married. And, I was feeling that pressure and that clock ticking and all that. So I was just like, hey, like, what are your thoughts? Like, because I was just kind of, and again, I really thought it would be like a longer discussion. We've been dating a few months at the time. So at that time. So I wasn't expecting that, he was gonna be like, let's go down the altar now. But I was like, validation. I wanted just that validation that like, okay,
Yeah,
someone like loves me enough
to want
that
to marry me.
to want to marry me, and even if it's not happening right this second, I know that it's happening, and I can sleep easy at night knowing that. Until,
Yeah,
like I said, his reaction, I was like, once he said all that, I was just like, that sounds sad. Like, what if I want to be in love? Like,
yeah. It makes me also wonder if you were like, I mean, if there was a subconscious part of you that was like, what if he says no? Like if it was
yeah,
already a way of you knowing you didn't want to marry him, but you were like, okay, well, if I ask him, of course it's subconscious, right? But if you're like, if I ask him, then he could say no and this be easy to just break up. But then he says yes in the most not exciting way.
right.
Like, then you're like, okay, yeah, I wanted to know. It was a no.
But it's just crazy to think about that because I don't think like, I've told that story before, and I've had people get, like, wide-eyed about it, but I don't think that that is rare. I think that there are plenty of people who, like, do the thing because the thing, whatever the thing is,
Mhm.
because they believe that that's what they're supposed to do. So they graduate college at 22, they're with someone who's nice enough, so they get married at 25. They have their first kid at 26, second kid at 27, and they just continue to do the thing.
Mhm. I was gonna ask your opinion on that actually. So I have a friend who is she's probably never gonna listen to this. So she's very almost obsessive about like getting married and having a baby soon. And I guess I'm like the person who doesn't have the baby fever. So I can't relate to the, oh my God, I need to get married. I need to get married. But what do you think about it especially since you're a dating coach, when the women are like, I need to get married, I need to get married. And maybe, I don't know, do you ever feel like they're rushing into it because of needing to fit that identity so much? Because I've
Uh,
realized I think it's definitely identity driven when I listen to certain parts of it.
Definitely. And I've talked to some women about the fact that, like, for them, the priority isn't marriage, it's motherhood. And
Mm, that's so funny.
they feel like they have to have a man to do that. And I understand biology. Like
Yeah, yeah.
but then sometimes that's what solves the issue right there, is that we start talking about like freezing eggs and things like that, and just making sure that those systems are in place so that if it takes them a little longer to find the right man, there's not that clock ticking right in their head.
Hmm.
And then once that's kind of handled, they're able to, date more freely. I actually had a client a couple of years ago who was just like, screw it, I'm going to become a mom. And she went the
In
surrogacy route.
vitro. Yeah.
Yeah. So so she had a surrogate and she had a sperm donor.
Oh,
So
nice.
she did that, went through pregnancy and everything. And and now she's in a relationship. When she's in a serious relationship that, they're not officially married, but it's looking like it's headed that way. And like she will say herself that, like, getting the baby out the way, you know what I mean? Kind of
Yeah.
like took that took that
Took
pressure
the
off.
pressure off. Yeah.
Right.
And what if you end up with someone you don't really want to be with? What if that's a temporary person and you're taking them along just because they were around?
Right. And
It's
then,
like a blinder.
yeah. And then for other women who do feel that pressure to get married, like, a lot of times once you start delving into it, it does become a matter of identity. Like, I'm a failure if I'm not married by 25 or by 30 and all that.
Hmm.
And it's having to understand that your identity is so much more than your marital status, and is so much more than your age. And even also, like, for me, my background, I have a history of chronic illness. So I can say without a doubt, I'm in better health in my 30s than I was in my 20s. So,
Hmm.
like, that experience kind of taught me that even the whole idea of like age and time is relative. And once you kind of get over this clock that really doesn't exist, like,
Yeah.
it just makes
Yeah.
life so much easier for you.
Yeah. And relieve yourself of that pressure. Like find a way to relieve yourself of that pressure, because making the wrong decision, having hell with a baby is not a good decision to make.
Right.
You want to enjoy the baby you just made. I do think it's funny though that you said, I don't know if you said most of your clients, but for many people it's the motherhood more than the marriage. But for me, it's the marriage more than the motherhood. So for me, I care significantly more about finding a partner than having a baby. Maybe that's why my baby clock is like not ticking right now.
Well, no, it's funny because I'm married. My husband is 5 years younger than I am, and his clock ticks louder than mine. So
Ready to be a dad. It's like, come on.
yes.
You're like, I'm good. I got stuff to do.
Yeah, I mean, like, it'll happen when
Yeah.
it happens. But I think a lot of women get put. I mean, men too, but we mostly deal with women. A lot of women just kind of get put on autopilot, and it kind of like shocks their brain. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And then they get on this track and they don't ever stop to think, why am I rushing this?
Yep. Yeah. And so many of them, like my friend who I was talking about, she's done some inner work, but even when I listen to her inner work, it's still geared around, I got to manifest a man to have a baby. I need to have this baby. I need to have these things. I need to be married. I just want to be this housewife that can do all these things. And of course, I just don't have these same views. But I wonder if there was no pressure from the outside or from her own inside to satisfy this goal of the outside world, then how she would actually still approach the exact same situation. Would you be more patient with the guy and different things? I think it is important to know the expectations of the other person. Like, I don't think you should date someone for 5 years when you're 30 and you know that they don't want to have kids and you want to have kids. Well, you
Yeah, it
know
doesn't
what
mismatch.
route
Yeah.
you, that's like that lack of compatibility. But if you're compatible in everything, then I think, I don't know, do you suggest that they, like, what do they do? Discuss timelines on when they're going to decide if they're going to stay together or what? I feel like I don't know. I feel like if there's too much pressure for it to work, then it makes it worse.
Yeah, I mean, I do tell women to be clear when they're dating men, to tell them, hey, marriage is important to me. It is a priority for me, and I am dating for marriage. But to also make it clear, that doesn't mean I'm in a rush to marry you.
Yeah. I think
What that means is what
yeah.
that means is I'm going to vet you, and I am ready to walk if I see that we're not compatible, because you could be a great person, but marriage is a priority.
Yeah. And I think that's so good. I think men often think if you are dating and smiling at them, that you assume that they're going to be your husband. And
Right.
although there are women like that, for the other parts of us, we're like, I feel like you should try harder because you're not trying nearly hard enough.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a lot of what I tell like women who are feeling that pressure to like get married, is
Mhm.
to date and to be, you have to be more willing than ever to walk, because you're
Yeah,
not
because
trying to
that's
waste
your
time.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's your time. That's the time to be brutal.
Right.
Right there. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, let's work on your discernment. Let's learn how to spot those red flags. And when you start seeing the red flags, like immediately go.
Yeah.
This is what is causing you the issues. The fact that you will stay in a relationship for 3, 4, 5 years on hope. Like
Oof.
we don't play that.
That is a quote right there. You better Instagram that one. Hope will not make this relationship work.
Michelle, if you could leave my audience with like just one thing that you want them to take away, what would that be?
Go figure out who you are and put yourself first in that search for who you are so that you can live the actual life that you're dreaming of and not the dreams of other people. Put yourself first and everything else will fall into place. Set your boundaries by putting yourself first. Do everything by putting yourself first. Your relationships will get better with other people, with yourself, with your higher spirit, and everything. Do the inner work. It's not exciting, but it's exciting to get the results, and it's always worth it.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, that as soon as you said it's not exciting, but it's like once you get to, not the other side is in as a destination, because there's never a destination. But once
Mhm.
you get into like the new season, I guess would be the best way
Yeah.
to, yeah. Like oh wow, like past me was really good to present me. Like thank you for that.
Oh, yeah. I will even do things today saying, tomorrow's Michelle's going to be so excited. I prepared
Yeah,
my workout clothes. Tomorrow's Michelle is, oh, thank you yesterday, Michelle. Like, I will hype both of them up because
right.
we are working for next year's Michelle right now. And you put in the work now. And the thing is with doing the inner work is, you know that it's going to be worth it. It's like a guarantee, but you just have to do it. It's like working out. If you do the things that you're supposed to do, it will work. It's like a math equation. It's going to happen. The things are going to happen, but you have to be willing to do the work. You have to love yourself enough to be disciplined to do certain things. Discipline is love for
It really
yourself.
is.
That means that you care about yourself enough to forego what is it? immediate gratification.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that you can grow in the way that you really ultimately desire to.
Yeah. No, all that talk about like soft life and like,
Oh
I'm
yeah.
just going to bask and rest in my femininity.
Oh
People don't
yes.
realize that like masculine energy is a container for the feminine. So
Mm-hmm.
this is why straight women want to be with a masculine man, that whole protector provider thing. But
Mm-hmm.
at the same
Yeah.
time, within ourselves, in order for me to be vulnerable and creative and to flow and all of that, I have to have those masculine containers in place. I mean, that's what a boundary is. A boundary is very masculine. Like
Yeah. Yeah. Set the boundaries. Lord help me set the boundaries. Hit me up if you want to know about boundaries. I will happily help everyone with boundaries. Lord.
yes. So actually that is where we should end. Where can people find you so they can hit you up?
So you can check out my website is www.minddesignwithmichelle.com. And my Instagram is I am Michelle White. I am Michelle White. And my Facebook is Mind Design with Michelle.
Okay.
And I'm running a 21-day free challenge starting at the beginning of the year, but it will be continuous after the beginning of the year. We'll just be doing it live then, and you can find the info on my site.
Okay. And yeah, both of us are on Instagram. I am at Keshia Rice. So, if you are listening to this or watching it, take a screenshot and like tag us. Let us know what you thought of the episode.
Absolutely. Please do.
Yeah. Michelle White, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This was great.
Hey there. So you made it all the way to the end of the episode, which means I have two things to say. One, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. And two, you like me. You really like me. So I would appreciate it if you would show that like by subscribing to this podcast so that more people can hear about it and enjoy it as much as you do. And if you want to know more about any of the links that I mentioned on this episode or any guests that I've had, be sure to go to KeshiaRice.com/links. That's KeshiaRice.com/links. I can't wait to talk to you again in the next episode. So see you then.